having an important job to control all of us, so he's not going to speak much. That's what I understood from his simple hi. So let me now also read out other other members who are part of this call, but not in the panel. I have Professor Vijay Raghavan joining now from his home, I believe. Hello, Professor Vijay.
Hello.
Yeah, perfect on time. Thank you so much, Professor Vijay.
Thank you.
So we were just going around and filling time and getting introduced. I'll now leave it to the first moderator of the launch session, Ms. Spurti Raman, to take over. Spurti, please.
Thanks, Chagan. With that, good evening, everybody who's joining here, and welcome to the launch event of the Public Consultations for India's Science, Technology and Innovation Policy, STIP 2020. And we also have a following town hall meet after that. We're very glad to have our eminent speakers here, our interested viewers and the audience who has joined us, and the spirited team behind this unique initiative. I'm Spurti Raman from Gubi Labs, and I will be the moderator for today's session, along with Nimita Pandey and Chagun Basha from the Science Policy Forum. Thank you all for joining us in this evening. The event is live streamed on YouTube. So before we start, I would like to give a shout out to the team behind today's session. First off is Aditya Kaushik, who is the technical host taking care of setting up the live streaming of today's event without any technical glitch. And next is Amrita and Dakshita, who are helping us collate questions that are coming over Facebook. Suresh and Sudhira are helping us collect the questions from our audience on Twitter. Zile is helping with LinkedIn and Ananya is helping with Instagram. So as you can see, these are the outreach mediums that we have opened where you can send in your questions today. Apart from that, since this is also a telecast on YouTube, Deepak and Divya are looking for questions from our YouTube audience. Before we begin, I just want to kind of invite all our audience today who have joined us here to ask as many questions as possible as comments on the YouTube channel. And for those of you who are on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram, please ask your questions with the hashtag STIP2020 Town Hall. And if possible, please do mention your name and place. We will try to bring up most of the questions to our speakers and have an answer for them. So without much delay, I would now like to invite Chagun to set the stage for today's event. Chagun, over to you.
Thanks so much, Spurti. That's quite quick and sharp, and I would like to learn it from you. How do you do that? Okay, timing is very important in today's session. So that I'm going to kind of keep it really crisp as Spurti. It's really a pleasure for me to be part of this initiative, personally as well as in my professional capacity. I would again like to welcome everyone who is part of this call, viewing from various platforms and attending through multiple channels. I mean, we have a very extended network now that is connected to this main video. On behalf of Office of PSA, DST, and collectively the STIP 2020 Secretariat that we set up from the last few months to run this policy process in a more inclusive manner. And also particularly with on behalf of Science Policy Forum and our partners in this initiative for STIP 2020 consultations, Gubi Lab and Rockstar Social, I'd like to welcome you all again. And it's going to be a journey from today about the science, technology, innovation policy process, the engagement and public and extended expert consultations. And we are really glad that we are partnering with the STIP 2020 Secretariat in developing this whole public consultation activities. So there are 6 tracks of activities that we have worked closely with the head of STIP 2020 Secretariat, Dr. Akhilesh Gupta, and PSA and DST Secretary. Dr. Akhilesh Gupta will be talking more on how to process, the engagement and public and extended expert consultations. And we are really glad that we are partnering with the STIP 2020 Secretariat in sorry, there was some loop back. I'll just continue from where I left. So on part of this policy process, we have thematic groups in track 2, extra ministerial and state consultations in track 3, and various other tracks which Dr. Gupta will be talking about. But only one thing I would like to really highlight to set the context of this launch of public consultation as well as this town hall meet is this process, STIP 2020 policy process, is based on 5 core principles. 1, decentralized; 2, experts driven; 3, evidence informed; 4, bottom up; and 5th, completely inclusive. So we are going to try our best to make sure that we achieve all these 5 traits of this policy process completely by the time we release this policy. Without further ado, I'm looking forward to the remarks by our speakers and the launch. I'll leave it to Spurti now to conduct the session. Over to you, Spurti.
Thank you, Chagan, for those remarks and setting the context for us and the audience here. Now, may I invite Dr. Akhilesh Gupta, Head of STIP 2020 Secretariat, Department of Science and Technology, who will walk us through the policy process and the activities planned thereof. Dr. Gupta, over to you.
Thank you, Spurti, Professor Vijay Raghavan, Professor Ashutosh Sharma, the moderators, all the organizers, distinguished guests, participant, student scientists, and a large number of viewers. They are watching this live. Media personnel, good number of them are joining today, ladies and gentlemen. So a very warm welcome to all the participants joining today's launch. Very good evening. And I would now present a very brief outline of the process that we have undertaken for formulating the Science and Technology Innovation Policy. So can I have my slides, please? So basically, the process will start with, is there somebody putting a slide on?
Yes, sir. Aditya is going to do that.
All right. So can I go to next slide, please? So, you know, I think Shagun has already, in fact, highlighted this, the key features of the proposed STIP policy. I'm just going to reiterate that part, that unlike the previous policies that we had in the past, this policy is going to be more evidence-driven rather than wisdom-based statement that any policy contains. Is going to be more thematic rather than just broad-based formulation, and also more inclusive and bottom-up rather than top-down. And also it is going to be a very, very extensive in its scope. Next slide. So if I look at the entire process of the formulation, you find that, you know, I think Shagun mentioned that the entire policy process is divided into 4 tracks. Track 1, track 2, track 3, and track 4. All these tracks are very different. Their formats are different. The stakeholders are of different kind, and the participants are of very different kind. And all of them have several components. Let me try to explain one by one each track. So the track 1 is the extended public consultation that we are in fact launching today, which will have several components, and I'll come to that, those components that we are going to launch one by one. Track 2 is in fact, it is the track which will create the skeleton of the policy. And so this is in fact, the most crucial part of the entire policy system, where we have set up 21 expert group, thematic group. So they all on different themes. All these groups, they work together, and each group will come up with the recommendation and that get collated and integrated into a policy. More than 150 experts from across the country have been drawn for this. The entire the meetings of these thematic groups are, in several rounds. So something like 3 to 4 rounds of each track, each thematic group meeting. So very detailed deliberation is already taking place. We propose to finish this thematic group consultation by end of this month. Track 3 is the ministerial and state consultations. This is also very important. For the first time, all line ministries are being consulted. So we have something like 96 ministries and state governments have been involved. They have been written to. The nodal officers have been identified from each ministry and state. And now we are going to consult with them. We need 3 kind of information on them. One is, of course, what kind of policies they have, what kind of specific data or knowledge that they have. And the third thing is their comments for, their suggestion for policy formulation. This is track 3. And track 4 is the apex committees. There are 6 apex committees chaired by PSA and 2 of them chaired by member Niti Aayog. This covers the entire ecosystem, including the industry, academia, all kind of agencies, and the ministry, the state government, everything. So this is an institutional participation at the apex level. All these tracks are interconnected, but they all had different kind of focus. Most of these actions in these tracks are going parallelly, but there are some actions which are sequential because they can be taken up only if one track part is over, but most of them are parallel action. Something like 15,000 people, stakeholders are going to be part of this consultation. And the entire process, we have given a deadline of 4 to 5 months we have to finish. Can you go to the next slide, please? So these are the tight timelines. In fact, PSA has given us, and so we are walking on a very tight rope, and all track 1 and track 4 process, as I said, going parallelly. And we in fact propose to have a skeleton of the policy first draft by July 1st week. That is our target, which will go for further consultation and tweaking. And then after all that we do and go to different tracks discussion, we will have a final draft ready by August end, and which will go for public consultations. It will be kept for 1 month public consultation, and then it will go for all further approvals processes and go for the cabinet approval by, say, October or so. We will go for the cabinet process. So this entire process is very, very, very tight in terms of schedule. So therefore, we need to have speed, accuracy, and intensity, all the 3. Next. So all this could be possible because we have very strong team. You have seen that on the screen, we have some of these young people sitting here, but there are 25. I call it the special 25 team of DST, STIP, Secretariat, jointly run by Office of PSA and DST. And they are officials of DST and TSA office, the senior policy fellows, the postdoctoral fellows, and also the young fellows. So this total, the 25 of them work day and night and work for this policy. And this is amazing that, kind of the energy level and the idea level that they are providing to us. Next. Now the final slide which I am going to show is the track 1 slide, which is the public and expert consultation that we are going to launch today. So this track comprises of 6 components, and all these 6 components are important in the context of this consultation. So the first consultation will be the public dialogue series with thought leaders, just like the one we are going to have this town hall meetings with PSA and Secretary DST. We have already identified 25 leading experts in the country, which will who will lead this kind of webinars and discussions, and they will have interaction with the public. Then comes the thematic panel discussion. We have set up 15 panels, each comprising of 4 to 5 experts. They will engage public on thematic areas. So one could be water, one could be agriculture, another could be innovation, fourth could be entrepreneurship or some other thing. All thematic discussion will take place through the expert panel. This is the second part. Third is the targeted survey instrument. We have, in fact, this is again a unique thing we have devised, where some questionnaires have been prepared. Of course, depending on the stakeholder type, this questionnaire are going to be different. And these have been prepared in local language, regional languages also. So one can, put these fill these kind of questionnaire form and give it to us. We will receive it at our portal. This is going to be interesting. Anybody can participate, right from the student at the school level to anybody at the senior level. All can participate in this targeted survey. Print articles, we have identified some senior scientists who are going to write articles in the newspaper and the magazine and journals about the overall process and how general public can participate into this process. Community podcast, we are going to create audio clippings which will be given to the community through community podcast mode, and people can learn how they can participate in the process of policy formulation. And the last one is very interesting. I think the idea came from Professor Ashutosh Sharma that we should have the ideathon, where the ideas will be invited from the public, students, scientists, anybody can give those big ideas as to how the policy should look like. Some creative input in the form of poster, cartoons, write-up, articles, anything. And we have decided again that top 100 ideas will be given some very special prize. So this is going to be the the format for track 1 process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for an insightful presentation on the process behind policy making. Now, may I request Professor Ashutosh Sharma, Secretary, Department of Science and Technology, for his comments on the importance of STIP 2020 and for the engagement of all stakeholders in the process of policy formation.
Thank you. My namaskar and good evening to all the committed science and technology people, stakeholders who have joined us today. See, the last policy on science and technology was in 2013. And you have now gone through the structure, the processes, and the architecture of the policy that we are discussing today. Akhilesh explained that very well. And that architecture, that process and the structure is indeed very different from the policies that have gone before. So what is the reason for this policy 2020? Well, so if you look at the changes that have been happening in the last 7 to 10 years, the pace of those changes, the speed at which future is coming at us, the challenges and opportunities are rather unique. I mean, one could not have foreseen them 10 years ago. So there is a compelling case for us to look at what the future holds. How do we do things that we are doing now? Some of them we do more of it. Some of them we do with greater quality. Some of it with greater relevance, and some of it with better connects. So if you just look at the disruptive changes, just couple of examples to understand what was not there 10 years ago and the world in which we live today, how is that very radically different from the one that we lived in even 10, 15 years ago. So if you look at the rise of Industry 4.0, very intimately connected with science, technology, and innovation. Industry 4.0, the new machines, sustainable development of the planet while using our technology, not creating as many shadows of technology, creating more light from technology, if you would, environment, climate, energy, health, water, agriculture, food security, the rise of thinking machines, artificial intelligence, machine learning, convergence of technologies. So the way we looked at technologies and sectors 10 years ago had more to do with working in silos, working with certain tools, working with certain disciplines. But the future is starting today is all about the convergence or integration of technologies. So if you look at even the cyber physical systems, it's about bundling up communication, computing, decision making, perception, and autonomous action. So all of that basically requires that we have very strong connects between different stakeholders. We have very strong connects between the entire knowledge ecosystem end to end. Of course, India has been moving also with some good speed in last 10 years. Just to share with you, if we look at the indicators, some of the key indicators, and there are very many more. So if we look at things that doubled or improved by 100% in last 7 to 10 years, if we look at our number of scientific publications in standard journals, so that has doubled. We are now number 3 in the world in terms of number of publications. Of course, now we have to start improving the relevance and quality of that research which goes into producing these publications. The R&D investment has more than doubled. The number of R&D labs and academic sector, universities, colleges, IITs, ICERs, they have doubled. The number of PhDs that we produce is nearly doubled. The new concept of postdoctorals and postdoctoral fellowship has come in a big way. We also third in the number of PhDs which are produced in the world. We also number 3 in the number of startups or technology-based startups in the world. That has happened with very great speed. But so there may be something like 15,000 startups today in the country. But looking at the opportunities, looking at the population, looking at the challenges, we really should put 1 or 2 zeros in front of it very, very rapidly. So we expect all of these things from our policy 2020. So what are the expectations if we look at the macro level? What are the reasons that we need this policy? And what is the reason that we need this policy with participation of the widest possible stakeholder base? And which is why we are here today, right? That with all of us together, we can do good things. We can even do great things. The things that are going to hold not only for next 10 years, but the framework which might hold for several decades, because the challenges that are going to hold for several decades have only now become clear or now becoming clear. So we need in the policy a seamless connection to all the stakeholders, to all the sectors. But we also need that seamless connection in the entire knowledge chain, which means from R&D, basic science, applied science, technology translation, human resources, startups, making products and technologies, and in fact, the industry and the market. So all of that requires that we identify all the weak links in this chain. So usually, if if you look at just R&D in isolation, if you look at this or that in isolation, then we feel that there is good muscle in it. But the weakness is not so much in the silos. The weakness is largely in the connections between those silos. So they are not able to leverage each other at the speed and the strength which is required. So we certainly should weave in the learnings or lessons from COVID-19 time. And we know we don't have time to get into it now, but there are certain processes, there are certain architecture and the structure, as well as the cultural aspects of science and technology, which have shown us some things which were not present or understood very well earlier. We certainly want to address the diversity, inclusion, and equity. Um, and that's very essential. It's not simply a lip service. So the question is, how do you translate all of that in terms of actions? So as was pointed out by my colleague Akhilesh Gupta, that that we want a policy which is not simply driven by statements of wisdom. Certainly, we need wisdom. We need overarching wisdom. We also need information. We also need data. We also need measurements. We also need control strategies, and we need actions that come out from there. So that completes the knowledge pyramid, going all the way from data, measurements, information, wisdom, and so on. And all of this must be actionable. It should be nimble. It should be ambitious, not simply incremental. I think the days of incremental changes or incremental thinking are a little bit past us. So we 10 years ago we talked about leapfrogging, right? I don't know if we really want to think about frogs anymore too much. I think we go for currently what we call pole vaulting. So therefore, it's another way to put the fact that we should be ambitious, not simply incremental. We are not looking for 5% changes in our R&D ecosystem, 2% changes in our innovation ecosystem, and so on. All of this has to go up a lot by orders of magnitude with all the speed that we can muster. It must be holistic. Like I said, the widest possible participation. And this is just the kickstart for that. And I'm sure that every single stakeholder will have a say in this process. We must balance invention with innovation. So a whole lot of our 10, 20 years ago, it was invention centric, and certainly we want to remain there. We want to enhance that, but also want to include innovation in it so that invention and innovation work as a symphony together to produce more of each other. We need to balance and connect the pull and push of knowledge, the pull of knowledge that comes from academia and R&D labs, to the pull that comes from startups and industry and MSMEs and all the other stakeholders. So that basically that they can work together, essentially saying, look, that we need to balance the knowledge generation systems with knowledge consuming systems. And so it has to be all pervasive. And so often people are saying, look, what about science and technology vertical? Now, this is a complete misnomer, and I think the policy would make it clear once and for all that science, technology, and innovation are not verticals. They are horizontals that basically seep into every activity that everybody does, whether it is other ministries, whether it is all the stakeholders in terms of institutions, in terms of people, in terms of sectors, in terms of applications. So that the policy should be so overarching that it makes sure that science and technology innovation are perceived and are indeed acted upon as horizontals of knowledge and not as mere verticals. Finally, so I would just conclude by saying that, of course, we're talking about one of the things about Atmanirbhar Bharat here, Atmanirbhar Bharat, but which is globally competitive. So our twin ambitions are indeed to be self-sufficient, to be Atmanirbhar in things that matter, right? But at the same time, being globally competitive in our quality, in our technology, in our products, going all the way, and that would happen only when the basic knowledge systems are nurtured with strength, and the basic knowledge systems are connected very, very strongly, seamlessly, holistically, with everything that uses knowledge. So I would stop there. My allotted 8 minutes are over. Thank you very much. All the best going forward.
Thank you, Professor Sharma, for your wonderful remarks. I now invite Professor Vijay Raghavan, Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India, to share his vision for STIP 2020. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Spurti, and thank you, Akhilesh, Shagun, Nimita, everyone else for organizing this, and thanks, Ashutosh, for leading the formulation and development of the Science, Technology and Innovation Policy 2020. We chanced upon rather unexpected times this year, and that has also opened us up to seeing how our science, technology, and innovation policy should be. This venture was started before COVID-19 came upon us, but this is a really important time for us to see in the context of COVID-19 what we need to do. Let me, first of all, I should say that in terms of the process and the content and what to do, Akhilesh's articulation is complete, and Ashutosh has articulated all the kinds of components which will go into the development of the policy and the reasons why they're important. So I will not repeat that. Let me bring out some more general aspects, and those general aspects are important from the point of view of India and its place on this planet. Given our large population, our history, our culture, the dispersal of the Indian diaspora all over the world, and being one of the few post-colonial countries which has invested both in the well-being of our people and their upliftment from poverty, as well as in fundamental science, we have an enormous responsibility for the world. India, with its young demography, if it does well over the next few years, can transform not only our country, but be a very valuable resource for the transformation of the world. And conversely, if we do not do a good job, we will do ourselves no good, and we will also do the planet no good. So let us ask ourselves, why should we therefore need a science, technology, and innovation policy? And the reasons for this have come about over historical time in very interesting ways. Humans, and India was one of the earliest examples of such settlements, early human settlements, agricultural settlements, resulted in the beginnings of what we see today in a post-industrial world, as it were, or in an industrial world. These settlements started transforming nature by the domestication of plants and animals. And these were examples, the first examples of humans not only understanding nature's engineering by looking at the planets, the stars, the seas, the weather, but also changing nature's engineering by domestication of plants and animals. So agriculture was the first example of technology being used. And this was before we understood the science behind that technology. So it's possible to develop new technology, new tools by hit and trial and by a variety of methods, and that takes time. Over time, because of our cultural evolution, language, the ability to make tools and to communicate in multiple ways, the steady increase in pace of these transformations by humans of nature has been astounding. That astounding transformation took completely new leaps with the onset of the Industrial Revolution, and then by other technologies such as nuclear power, the development of the Haber-Bosch process to make fertilizers, ammonia, and so on and so forth. In other words, humans have constantly been innovative in corralling nature to our purpose. Now, this has had an extraordinary impact on the planet and on our society. This approach has constantly meant, the Industrial Revolution approach has constantly meant that we need something, the other, some source of energy, as it were, to reduce entropy in closed environments. Those environments can be our cities, our societies, our countries, but we need ores, minerals, fuel, people working for us who don't belong to our societies. And therefore, the use of natural resources and humans by societies resulted in creating extraordinary richness and value to the societies while excluding others. And those others could be environments or other people. Today, we have reached or are at the beginning of a new world order. We can no longer have isolated structures growing at the expense of other structures. In other words, there is no free lunch. How does therefore one have sustainable development when you're not allowed to exploit the environment, when we shouldn't be exploiting other people, and we need to have balance of trade and equitable development? That's an enormous challenge. COVID-19 has shown us how the global supply chains can be very rapidly affected if we don't take these factors into account. Strong and small number of nodes of economic and scientific and technological power can break down in times of crisis and seriously affect a large number of people. So these are very important challenges. And therefore, our science, technology, and innovation policy needs to look forward in this post-COVID world in truly innovative ways. What are the ways we can do that? And one very important way, and this is highlighted by some of our responses to the pandemic, is a very critical requirement to invest widely in science and technology across the country. Today, very large part of our Government of India investment, and the Government of India is the major investor, large part of our investment in science and technology goes to a small number of central universities, research institutions, and laboratories. A very large number of our students go to state government institutions, where in their colleges and universities, access to research, access to science is modest, if not poor. Therefore, the principal focus, the principal consequence of our policy needs to be the ability to reach people at large and have access to science and knowledge across scale. Knowledge is power, and unless people have that power, they will be done a great disservice in this world, which is heavily driven by science, technology, and knowledge. That's very important. To do that, we need to change something else, and we have been talking about this for the past 4 years, and this is now time for action. Fundamentally, all research anywhere in the world should be freely available to everyone, everywhere in the world. Publicly funded research must be available to all humanity. There are, costs for curating that research, putting it together and making it accessible. Those are fair costs, but paywalls which prevent any citizen from accessing that research are not correct, and there should be ways by which that is accessible. That research should be accessible in your native language. That requires other costs, but it's important that your ability to think, your power of abstractions, which comes from your language and your culture, should be also the language of research. If one has to think innovatively, one has to think independently, and you're asked to do that in a language different from what you've grown up with, you come up with a handicap. Many brilliant people can circumvent that handicap, but that is not a fair system. A fair system will allow you to think independently in your language, also have access, you must also learn other languages, but your learning in your language should be allowed. So that's the first aspect of the policy which we should look at. How do we achieve the foundation of access of science to the largest number of people in our country. The tools for doing that are much more available now. The fact that we're having these meetings by video, the crisis has transformed such kind of conferencing, but also translation and other tools should become more readily available. Translators should be valued enormously because we can't do everything by machine by any means. And therefore, young students who learn and do science should be encouraged to communicate science in multiple languages and become part-time or full-time translators. That's a very, very important point. Now, at the foundational level, having pushed this kind of access to knowledge, we must also push to have access to the tools of research. People must be able to do small experiments, simple experiments, or complex experiments of any kind, whether it's in mathematics or in astronomy. This is also something which is much more feasible today than it was 10 or 15 years ago. And the reason for that is if we have communication accessible to a large number of our students or all of our students, a very large part of the use of complex instruments, the access to complex data and interpretation and their interpretation and analysis, all can make for quality research and quality science in a manner which will unleash young people on a very large scale. This is not a substitute for having these resources and facilities in our own institution. That must go on in parallel, but the ability to access data and resources nationally and globally is something which is much more feasible now than ever before, and that must be done. So that's a second. So first you have people at the foundation, and then you have access to research. Now we come to a third level where this combination, which is already there in a dispersed way in our country, but we need to make it much more accessible across the country, can address any problem in fundamental research or in the most applied research. This churning of ideas of bright people working together, looking at problems which are very abstract or very real, allows any problem to be addressed. These problems can be divided into broadly 4 categories. Those which we know are very pressing and needed for our society. So these teams of people can participate in addressing them. In many ways, we have used our structures in a very rigid, siloed manner to address complicated problems. You have a defense R&D organization for defense research. You have the CSIR for taking science to industry. You have the Department of Biotechnology. You have the Indian Council for Medical Research. We must have a policy which makes all these structures extraordinarily porous so that these bottom 2 levels can constantly come in and interact and churn and bright ideas can come. So therefore, when you go into any of these laboratories, our research institution laboratories, you should find them bubbling with young people. And just as you find that happening, when we go into our research, into our universities, into our colleges, you should find them mixed with people from these institutions. So this porosity, this mixture of people from research institutions and universities, which is a challenge, it's a geographical challenge, it's a logistical challenge, it's an administrative challenge, those can and should be addressed. So any problem, basic or applied, can be taken up. Finally, at the highest level, we should take on big missions. So far, we have taken big missions which have been exciting. They are very, very important. They cut to the frontiers of science, but we need to re-envision new kinds of missions which we can take up. The big missions we have taken up are, for example, in the Laser Interferometric Gravitational Observatory, the 30-meter telescope. We participate in CERN. We participate in the Square Kilometer Array, and this is wonderful because this, when amplified, can allow our industry and our scientists to participate in big scientific missions in a manner which otherwise no single country can. This is terrific. But now we should become, in addition to this, more imaginative and get the best minds in the country and the best people from all over the world to come to solve complex problems which are relevant for India and the world. And these fall into 3 categories. And therefore, 3 big missions need to be taken up. And the question is, how can we formulate that into policy? These fall into the broad categories of climate change, global warming, climate change, and both mitigating the consequences of climate change and preventing further enhancement of global temperatures, sea level rising, and so on. Those technologies are very, very important. So far, much of our research in these kinds of areas have looked at data available globally. We need to now also look at that in specific context much more. We know that our Indian scientists, ocean scientists, are looking at the Bay of Bengal and the Sundarbans and what will happen. But that should become a national project to understand how sea level rise in those kinds of areas will affect us. What about our coastal areas? What about the deep ocean? How will changes there, climate changes affect the deep ocean? So those are very exciting areas, big science projects of that kind we should take up. So climate change is one area. The second is the environment. The COVID crisis points out to that. We need more environmental research, more ecological research than ever before. So ecology and environment should become a major national mission. Our biodiversity should become a major national mission. And therefore, this kind of a big science, looking from the collection of organisms and their interactions with our ecosystem, is a very exciting area where mathematicians to biologists and city planners and everyone can come together. So scale of ecosystems, ecology, and the environment is very, very important. So that's the second. And the third challenge is something which is very important and very distinct from these two. And that third challenge is information. Today, increasingly, the distillation of data, converting information into knowledge, and converting knowledge into decision-making has become the powerhouse of big companies and major programs all over the world. Loosely, these are called artificial intelligence programs, but more broadly, they involve decision-making using data in every single sphere. This is going to change lives all over the world and change industry all over the world. Ashutosh alluded to cyber physical systems. They are but one component of this. But increasingly, you are going to be told, we are going to be told what's good for us because of the analysis of huge swaths of data, which will tell us that this decision is better than that decision. And indeed, that kind of advice may actually be right and valuable. But that results in a usurping of the flexibility you have in making your kind of mistakes and your kind of decisions. How does one balance the value of data and its analysis with your flexibility and your independence and your ownership of that data and the consequences of that? That's going to be an enormous challenge in every field, from medicine, from agriculture to health, from transportation, and so on and so forth. That can happen only if we weave back a big mission in the understanding and use of data to the bottom of the pyramid again, where people, that is people at large, everyone should have a comfort in handling data, understanding it, and using it. So all our students, no matter whether you're a historian or a biologist, needs to be adept at understanding the use of information in a sophisticated manner. Once you do that, with our large demography, we have unleashed a very huge power into this data analysis stream, both in terms of people who understand and use it, but also people who are innovative there for public good. And therefore, we no longer need to fear what others will do with data everywhere in the world, but we can be participating in ensuring that that's used for public good. So this is the circle which I wanted to talk about, from people to big missions and back to people. And I think when you combine this kind of a, I gave a very broad view deliberately, but we had a very detailed structure from Dr. Gupta and Ashutosh Sharma, Dr. Ashutosh Sharma. So both these, all these three should allow for a good discussion and hopefully for a good policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Vijay Raghavan, for your thoughtful insights and for taking us through the need for a comprehensive science policy. So with these thoughts in mind, we now open the town hall meet. It's an opportunity for the public to ask questions on STIP 2020. This event, may I remind, is being recorded and will be available on the Science Policy Forum website in case there are somebody among the audience who cannot make it today. A kind reminder is to use the hashtag STIP 2020 Town Hall in all your questions when you post them on different medium, along with your name and place if possible, so that our moderators can collect them and pose it to our speakers. I now call upon Nimita and Shagun to moderate the town hall interaction. Over to you, Nimita.
Thank you, Spurti. I welcome all of you to this exciting segment, which is called the STIP 2020 Town Hall Meet. And I'm just going through all these social media platforms, and hundreds of questions are being raised on the STIP 2020 policy formulation process. And to begin with, I would say I am tempted by the idea what Professor Vijay Raghavan cited about science communication. And the first question I would like to pose to him as to how to promote science temper with a long-term policy vision. This question comes from Rahul Mongia, who is in fact a Delhiite stuck in US because of COVID. And he raised this question on the platform of the SPF discussion forum. So over to you, Professor Raghavan.
Thank you very much, Nimita, and thanks, Rahul, for the question. Science communication is indeed a big challenge, in addition to the usual challenges we have, because today the access to the platforms for communication are so widespread that you can have communication of all kinds. Now, that should not make us afraid of having potentially a decrease in the quality of communication any more than the advent of printing and the printing press resulted in a spate of different kinds of books. So, in other words, there will be a range of communication and the range of views about science, but that's perfectly fine. My feeling is there are two aspects about science communication. One is communicating science, and the other is analyzing science for society. They are both distinct and require different kinds of mindsets. And both of these can be done by people who don't have a science background. So it's important to keep in mind that anyone can become a good communicator, and anyone can become a good science communicator, with a slight caveat that it requires an enormous amount of thought and work. It's not easy. And that requires your learning to understand a field and do it well. Anil Ananthaswamy, who's written several books on science, as a science journalist, conducts a science journalism workshop in which he looks at the broader aspect of science communication also. So my suggestion is that such workshops in multiple languages across the country, but by quality teachers, is something which will increase our understanding of both science communication as well as understanding science itself.
Thank you, Professor Vijay. I'm just going to join Nimita in actually making this discussion quite lively and organic. Just in connection to what you just spoke, there is another question from KP Madhu about how do we make science communication as a tool to build trust in the public eye for publicly funded research? How do we actually make our publicly funded research projects and their outcomes transparent enough so that that helps in trust building and also public to increase the scientific temper? And this question is actually posed towards Professor Ashutosh Sharma. Professor Sharma, if you could elaborate on this.
No, certainly. I think it's extremely important that the outcome of our research, our development, and everything else that's supported by the government, by public money, ought to be totally transparent. It should be accessible to all. Was already pointed out by Dr. Vijay Raghavan that we need democratization of scientific knowledge. And there are many different ways to go about doing it. And in the months and years to come, you would see more of it. Very simply put, of course, we are going to start in DST, and I'm sure others would do that as well. That the conclusion, the output, the outcome of everything which is supported would be available on the website with the contact and stuff. So it's, people who are looking for information of a certain kind, they know where that work is being done, who are the experts, and so on. So it's about connecting people, but at the same time, putting in public domain what is out there. And I'm also sure that the whole model of, this scientific publishing is going to undergo sea changes, very disruptive changes in few years to come. It was already alluded by Professor Vijay Raghavan about having, for example, huge databases of scientific publications. And imagine that you combine that with the power of artificial intelligence and machine learning. You see, there is an exponential growth of knowledge, of maybe not knowledge, but certainly information, right? So today, when I was doing PhD, well, at that time I used to read 2 journals, and that was sufficient in my area. Today, it's all distributed. So, so if you had a huge database which is accessible to all, and there are these tools which are working for you, they would be actually be able to tell you as to what kind of things you may wish to study. For example, is not to restrict the choices about things that you want to study, but given the complexity and the volume out there, you would have to make some choices. So now in terms of, I completely agree that scientific communication is of course very important, but in the Indian context, it has even a separate meaning. Now, one of the meanings is that, look, science communication is something that we have not taught at all to our scientists. Now, that may seem like a paradox. So we have taught many things. We have how to use a microscope, for example, or do all of those things. But nothing in any of our competitive exams have prepared us for effective communication, because there's no exam actually requires, cracking of any exam does not require that you communicate your science is an effective way. And you have to communicate it to different kind of stakeholders. You have to communicate to people who work in your area. You have to communicate to people who don't work in your area but have science background. You also have to communicate to people at large. So there are many different things which are being done. They are on limited scale, and I'm sure they're scaling them up with even greater sense of purpose and relevance is something that this policy would look into. So science communication, it starts actually from the school level. By the time you are into PhD, it's already late. And of course, we don't have too many science, journalists and so on. And often the reason cited is, look, people are now interested in reading science, that people, well, we don't have enough good science to report on in the country, and that editors are not interested in it. I think all of these are rather spacious arguments. So point is that we are lacking some of it on all 3 fronts, I agree. But it is possible. There's great amount of interesting, exciting work being done in the country that needs to be presented to people at large. And if we cannot get enough journalists interested in it, we have to convert a lot of our scientists into science journalists. So that is obviously an open avenue to look into. And I think our policy would pay special attention to science communication aspects at all levels, and also democratization of knowledge and information systems. I don't know if you want me to talk about scientific temper. That was another word that I heard a couple of times, but we can take it up now, or if there's enough interest in it, I'm happy to talk about that also.
What actually concerns me, I'm actually like a little tempted right now, is the amount of questions and comments and thoughts that we are receiving is overwhelming. I mean, we are like running between slabs to take so many. So we are going to quickly go to the second set of.
I'm very happy to stay here until 10 o'clock or whatever it takes. If you want to do that, we can, discuss like 2 friends sitting having coffee in a park.
That's very heartening to hear, and I'm glad Professor Vijayaragan is also laughing and giving a nod. Probably, I'll ask Nimita to quickly take up another important question that has come up in terms of making this information public. Nimita.
Yeah, so thank you. And of course, this is such an overwhelming kind of a session going on. I am completely amazed with the response of the public right now and all the participants and audience right now. So there are a lot of questions coming up regarding the idea of establishing science communication chairs. Like, do we have any thought about democratization of science communication and decentralization of this idea? If Professor Vijayaraghavan could give us some insight on that.
Yes, I think that's something which is, very briefly answered. Not only should there be such chairs should be used to develop, cohorts of students and researchers who look on this as a serious discipline, as distinct from something which needs to be done or a side activity. There are such programs which we need to develop with a particular Indian viewpoint about how to do that effectively. And that's something which certainly can be done. Absolutely.
Thank you.
In fact, this is the easy part. I'm sure policy will go a lot beyond actually, establishing chairs and stuff. That's very routine, and it certainly would be done in large numbers. As well as training, for example, by professional communicators, workshops, training workshops at all levels for PhD students, how to write effective papers and so on, as well as for other people. So as well as for science journalists. In fact, for science journalists, we have been running some workshops. There may be 50 science journalists that come and talk about how to write effectively and so on. But that is an activity which can be scaled up a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Sharma and Professor Vijay, for that commitment on that part. There is an important point coming up from multiple voices. So I'm going to take the one who actually proposed first in the comment section, Dr. Krishna Swami. He's saying, I'm also asking, all the presentation, consultation, drafting paper, feedback must all be put in an online platform for public view of the STIP 2020 policy in this process, so that it gives a complete transparency of this process. And the panel can, he's asking, can the panel now can comment or commit to this? I'll ask any one of you to maybe give that commitment.
Since there is no person called panel here, so I wasn't sure who you are asking. But anyway, I can, a very short point is yes. You want it to be totally transparent, but on a lighter note, not so transparent that nothing is seen there. Okay, so right, so it has to be done in a sense that, yes, that everybody should be able to contribute, all stakeholders. And the stakeholder base for science and technology is the widest possible in society, right? And so, of course, it should not be frivolous, right? What we want is something which is really insightful, actionable, very important, right? So often, I all day long I'm repeating my wish list, and everybody agrees with it. The whole point is, how would we actually translate that into action, right? And so I appeal to everybody here, as well as all the friends and stakeholders who would join us through different meetings, is that this is a very committed, it's a very sincere effort, right? So what it means is that the gravity, the seriousness of this purpose must be met by deep thinking, by not just as a spirit of criticism. We must identify what the weak points are, and we must have very compelling solutions going forward for those. And is my really sincere appeal to everybody here that this would be, it would be transparent. It would be with the participation of all possible stakeholders who can contribute. And so that is the guarantee going forward.
Thank you, Professor Sharma. Dr. Krishnamurthy, I think thanks for putting that question, and many acknowledged and supported you in the comment section. And now we got a commitment, and we'll work towards making all the documents public and transparent from now on. Now, let me just quickly go to a next set of questions. We clubbed 2 or 3 of them. This is indeed a policy question, and I'm going to start with Professor Vijay Raghavan here because we have been involved for last few years in the open access. What is an ideal model for open access? Are we going to go for a green, gold, or copper, or whatever new color we want to call it? And what is the right balance between a business model versus a philanthropic model and all of that? The question here in a distilled way is, what can be the best way to achieve open access to scholarly communication in country like India? Like, what is, in your opinion, being part of all these initiatives and commitments, what do you think is the right way ahead in open access for scholarly publications, particularly with respect to now we are coming up with this policy? So, Professor Vijay.
Thank you very much. Very briefly, scholarly publications have great value. That value comes not just from the papers we submit, but from scholarly societies, journals, publishers putting in time and effort through reviewers and their process to enhance the quality of what is eventually published. There are many, many open platforms where you don't have a review process. They are also invaluable as part of this process. So the value of the whole chain is certainly there. Each component of the chain has strengths and weaknesses, but those we can analyze. The problems which we face today come from a distortion of components of this value. It would be perfectly fine if one had to pay in some manner, of course things don't come free, for the enhancement of which can be discussed and negotiated. But once publicly funded research goes into such situations, it cannot be a situation that is inaccessible to the public. When you walk into a hospital, when someone walks into a hospital or walks into a farm or looks at a forest, they should have the right as citizens of this planet to look up scholarly publications in an area related to what they see or what they want to understand and find out what is going on. That doesn't have to be paid for again by the user. So that is the fundamental point at issue over here. Why should people pay again and again for the same thing? So that fortress of access has to crumble first. There's a second access issue which is there, a second cost issue which has come up, that increasingly people, that is authors, are expected to pay rather substantial costs for getting their article published in a journal on the argument that there are some journals who survive entirely by that. They could be quality journals. Let's leave aside predatory journals for a moment. That's a different topic. These quality journals need this fee for author publishing charges, as it were, to survive, right? But those charges are disproportionately high for places like India, where the exchange rate affects them hugely. They are quite high elsewhere also. So that's another matter which needs to be done, because that makes it difficult for scientists to publish in quality places, which are also expensive. These issues are very easily addressable if we address them on scale in a country of the size of India. But if you try to address them at the institutional level or at the level of groups of institutions, then we would be not in a strong position to negotiate what is happening. And we are actually negotiating in a nationwide level. And I'm sure that very soon the time will come when both access and the ability to publish at reasonable cost are available. Last point here, today's technology allows journals of quality to come up anywhere. Indeed, quality journals all over the world, the back-end IT infrastructure, and previously when printing was important, the back-end printing infrastructure, the design was done in India. It's still being done in India. So there is nothing to stop Indian scientists, our Indian science academies, our Indian researchers to aspire to make really high quality journals which have complete access along the lines I've said. The costs are something which will not be trivial, but there will also be costs which can be addressed. Thank you.
Um, there is a connecting question here. I'm sorry to bring this up again because although you both have given some detailed justification, I'm also looking forward to the line between the line, which is very soon we are going to have an affordable model at the national wide. The question here by many others have been about the DBT DST open access policy. Is that policy still active, or is it going to be only the policy of these two departments? Why not make it a national policy and built on it? There are some connected questions there. Any thoughts quickly on the DBT DST OA policy that you enacted, Professor?
Shagun, can I come in here? This whole point about access and journals is very important, and but it's one component of a broader science and technology policy. I suggest we have a detailed discussion on this, which was being planned anyway. But the short answer to your question is that policy exists, and of course it should be broadened.
Thank you, Professor. Nimita?
Yeah, thank you, Professor. And I am very intrigued to start off a very different topic altogether. And maybe it is too close to my heart as well, which is inclusion and gender. So there are many questions coming up with that. I don't know, from on Twitter, on Facebook. I could see it on YouTube. Oh God, there are so many for gender in STEM. And so I would just say that there is a question which kind of sums up all these concerns as a statement that there is a need to have a separate section on women in STEM and STI in the policy, with outlining specific objectives and goals, along with an assessment framework for policy instruments and initiatives. What are your take on that? And I would first like to hear from Professor Sharma on this, and then maybe Professor Raghavan can intervene.
Yeah, so I mean, the point is that the policy should, in a very committed way, address the issues of diversity, the issue of equity and inclusion. And so when you talk about diversity, inclusion, equity, there are several dimensions to it. One of the dimensions is gender, which is a very dominant dimension to this issue. Gender, but together with, for example, your geographical location, the age, whole lot, so when I was a little bit younger, somebody in one of the meetings selecting fellows for INSA told me that we don't take anybody below 50 seriously. So you see, age, there is a very established hierarchy in society, which also seeps into science. Now, science is something which you cannot, you see in government job, there is a hierarchy based on your age. But in knowledge systems, that hierarchy cannot be taken very seriously. So therefore, there are many types of inclusion and diversity to produce leadership in different sections of society, right? So this is about, we said about the socioeconomic strata, about educational level, about gender, about geography, and not the least of which is, I was very intrigued that one of my friends, she had posted on Facebook. When I read it, I think yesterday, she said that, people who come from small towns, people think that they are less intelligent. Also related to that is the fact that people who don't speak English are also considered less intelligent as a stereotype by people who are otherwise, right? So all of these actually require inclusion, breaking of stereotypes, providing level playing field, right? So it's not about, having quotas and stuff. It's about providing a level playing field by removing the weaknesses that each of these sections has. In fact, to give you an example, a very little example, starting a new scheme called Vigyan Jyoti, the whole purpose of which is to get more women enrolled into top technology colleges in those areas which are underrepresented, right? So this is not all of it, but I'm saying that through this kind of stuff, policy, which is actionable, we can address, and we should and we will address issues related to diversity, gender being, like I said, being a big part of it. Now, that particular problem is not simply broken down into saying, oh, just give more fellowships, right? It's not that simple, right? Even though a lot of people argue for those kind of solutions, it is part of that solution, no doubt. But the issues are much deeper. So you have to look at what stage, what intervention is required. And it is different even for different sciences, for different engineering, for medicine. It is different in academia versus it's different in corporate world, right? So all of that, a good understanding of that, good insight into it, would allow us to weave these elements into the policy. And I haven't any doubt that there would be a separate section on it. That's not the important point. The important point is whether we cover it in the spread and depth that it deserves, providing real solutions to the problems.
Thank you,
So
Professor.
we should ask people about why they think that diversity is important. Because I think 30 years ago, people didn't even question that, right? It is not that simple. So if we understand the meaning of diversity and inclusion and how it strengthens everything we do, right? That is not simply saying, we should do that, right? Because then people start questioning as to why we should do that, isn't it? So I think that this requires a separate webinar. I have no doubt about it. Indeed, every single of your questions that we have taken and will be taking, I think requires a separate webinar, inviting people who have interest in that particular aspect, right? So that one is able to do good justice to it. Not like some, some knee-jerk reaction, which is over in 2 minutes, and then we go home. Actually, we are already home, but right? So you understand, right? And it will be taken seriously in the policy.
Thank you so much, Professor. And before I hand over the mic to Professor Vijayaraghavan, I just want to add a little bit of twist to this question, not just gender, but also the idea of the marginalized community, as Professor Sharma mentioned, that it has a broader kind of a discourse altogether about diversity and inclusion. So how will this policy address the exclusion of the marginalized, which we like many questions have been come up. If I could just say one name, we see Manish Kumar from Chhattisgarh raising this problem of the marginalized community. I understand his concern coming from a region of that kind. So yes, so Professor, if you could give us some insight on that, as terms of how we can include marginalized community into the STI ecosystem. Over to you, sir.
That's to me? Yeah, okay. Well, the answer needs to be seen from the point I made initially about language primarily, and of course, access to information. Our scientific teaching should be available right from the earliest school level in our native languages, as well as access to quality literature should be available in our languages. Then you unleash the power of and the beauty of science into people who otherwise have to struggle at every level to go past hurdles to get access. That is a primary requirement. Bottom up, in terms of access, bottom up. Otherwise, in other aspects also, we need to change our systems, and they have been changing, perhaps too slow, but they have been changing. If you look at the diversity of people we have today, it's far more diverse than 60 years ago, and 30 years ago, it was more diverse than 60 years ago. You look at the regions people come from, the kinds of backgrounds they come from, that is changing slowly. But primarily, I think it's a point of access to knowledge and information. There are multiple other parameters which are linked. It's not just about science, technology, and innovation. It's about economic growth. It's about the inclusive nature of society. It's about divisiveness and inclusion in society. All those are interconnected, no doubt. But from a science perspective, information being available across different groups of any kind, different regions of the country would be very valuable.
Thank you, Professor Vijayaraghavan. Okay, over to you, Shagun. Maybe you have more interesting questions.
Thanks, Nimita. Actually, I was just trying to connect. How do I take a lead from what is being spoken from to what is actually coming in, actually flooding in? So the grassroots innovation, Professor Vijay, actually, I'm going to take it from what you just said. The regional languages and grassroots level innovations that are kind of neglected at some level because the mainstream innovation ecosystem doesn't consider the local processes and skills which many of our communities in India particularly consider as a knowledge system for them. How are we going to, the question is this, how are we going to promote and adapt, or let's say even integrate our traditional knowledge system processes and skills into a formal system of innovation? How this policy is going to help that? Just a
So
quick
that
thing to answer, Professor Vijay. Yeah, this question is coming from multiple sources. One of the name is Dr. Lal Singh from Shimla. Over to you, Professor Vijay.
Thank you. This is a fundamentally very, very important question because at the heart of it lies not just our traditional knowledge systems, there's incredible wisdom and understanding, amongst our farmers, amongst those who work in fragile environments, in our textiles, in our architectures, and so on and so forth. Conserving water, there are numerous examples. So that those knowledge systems are there. But fundamentally, the reason why they don't get amplified and go seamlessly into more centralized current structures is a mindset. And it's not that, that is available and we must do something to access it. That mindset that we must access such knowledge systems immediately puts such knowledge systems into a distinct category. Those are knowledge systems. They happen to be traditional knowledge systems. There's much to learn. And as scientists, you would learn from those systems just as you would learn from current systems or more futuristic systems. And why does this wall come about? This wall comes about because primarily we in research and in science have grown to consider ourselves having stepped over the barriers to enter as being in a distinct space and not being connected to the space where we came from. Part of the answers lie in language and access, which I talked about. But another part is a cultural mindset change, which looks at our environments as bereft of innovation, intelligence, and forward thinking, right? And that is something which actually one learns after having jumped over and come into this wall. That's a conceptual barrier also which we need to get in. And it's not a barrier which is there only amongst those who are elites. It is everyone who jumps across that wall is taught to break into that new mindset and to discard what is around us. Genuine curiosity and understanding in our farm practices, in our textile practices, in our architecture, in our dealing with the climate and environment. Genuine curiosity should not be lost when we jump over and go to new walls. And that's very, very rare to see. Some individuals don't lose it, but culturally we must try and see how we can have that without losing and while imbibing the formalism and the value of new structures.
Thank you, Professor Vijay. Nimita, do you have anything on these lines to add it?
I believe most of the points have been covered, but yes, I could see a few questions regarding how these grassroots innovations can be supported in terms of, what sort of, how we will be promoting them. So what sort of platforms we think of in terms of what are the existing platforms, how this policy would bring new platforms or strengthen the existing platforms. There are a lot of concerns regarding that. So if Professor Sharma could tell us something about that.
So of course, this the first thing I completely what Professor Vijay Raghavan said. First of all, we shouldn't be calling something grassroots innovation and something else just pure innovation. I think it sets up a barrier which is not necessary. Second thing I would say is, what is the meaning of this so-called grassroots innovation? The meaning is, first thing, My friend Dr. Anil Gupta, he lives in Ahmedabad, said in his book, he said, look, the minds at the margins of society are not marginal minds. Basically, we often equate the two, and therefore we're very confused about the potential for so-called grassroots innovation. Now you think about the fact that the PhD students and all the top scientists and everybody else, they're going to think in a certain way, and they would not necessarily know even the problems of people who live in small towns, who have 2 bigha land to cultivate, right? So when we are talking about all the high tech and we are thinking about farm machinery, that farm machinery may not be at all relevant for the kind of agriculture that we have to do. Now, having said that, this is just an example. I can give such fascinating examples, and I learned about all of them from a National Innovation Foundation in Ahmedabad, whose mandate it is to actually scout for ideas related to what you call grassroots innovation, small towns, farmers, women, children, school-going children, everybody, right? Now, having looked at all of that, they have a database of about 5 lakh ideas. So it's not the ideas that we lack. So what is it that we lack going forward, right? So what we lack is, look, there is a lack of connecting these ideas to local entrepreneurs and the micro financing for it, right? So we already have platforms, and there can be more platforms and stuff for scouting of ideas, even developing those ideas, giving support for prototyping of ideas, giving support about business models. All of that happens on some scale. But the weak link, in fact, is the same weak link which is with all innovation ecosystem, is nothing different. So while we have, these ideas going forward to a certain point, and then they stop in their tracks there, right? And so why it stops in the tracks? It is not a problem of not having ideas, not having good ideas, not having translatable ideas. It is a question of having this entrepreneurship network muscle to convert ideas into businesses, right? And this is where this policy in terms of grassroots innovation should be focused on. I'll just conclude by saying one more idea as to how this could be done. So I talked about the fact that our incubators, that we say, technology incubators, um, they have a certain model of incubation, which is like a model which has come from somewhere else, right? It's not necessary, it has not evolved a great deal after coming here. Now that model is that basically you have these 20, 30 companies that incubate in this incubator space, which is good and they're doing well, right? But this model is not scalable. So if we wanted to go from 30 companies to 300 companies tomorrow, they are not equipped for it because they have not thought about it, but it's doable. So the way it is doable is you don't have to insist on physical space of the incubator being the major reason for incubation. You have to think about what are the services that incubator provide. So the incubator provide networking, they provide informational resources, they provide business models, they provide some infrastructural resources, they provide connections to the outside world and prototyping and where to get money from, how to make friends. All of these services can be provided by the incubators, whether the incubation happens in the physical space there or not. So we are working on that model, basically how to make it 10x incubations overnight and 100x incubation in few years from now, right? And all of these, so the nature of incubating should be more diverse than what we have now. What we have now are basically very, bright, educated IITians, PhDs, and these people, they also, their tribe also has to increase. But at the same time, we have to bring in our fold this other, set of people who can do wonders for our economy and for our way of thinking and our solutions. If you just give me 30 seconds, I'll tell you such a compelling example of grassroots innovation, which you would be just amazed. And it got me thinking. So I'm sure our viewers also, it'll get them thinking. So in this National Innovation Foundation program called Manak, wherein we reach out 5 lakh schools to get 10 lakh innovative ideas, and then the whole chain of that. But so I talked to these young people from school, and there was this girl, maybe I think 6th or 7th standard, and so they are very shy people. Again, this is what we are saying. Look, we have to bring out this latent capacity in the system to contribute, right? So I asked her, look, what is your problem in life? She says, I am little short, and the taps in my school are at a height that I cannot reach, and people make fun of me. And I mean, I'm thirsty, right? And so I said, and what is the solution? So by the way, anybody who poses a problem must also provide a solution. Okay. And it may not be the real solution. It may not be the final solution. It may not be optimal solution, but it means that we have thought about it. Now, this girl, she said, look, what we can do is that these are taps which are mounted on this pipe. We can tilt the pipe so that one tap on this end is lower and I can drink from there. And this tap is higher and, taller people can drink from there, right? So now this is not a great deal of science and technology. It's not rocket science, but it's just that no PhD actually would think about it. The whole point is that, right? And this actionable solution, I told the headmaster, he said, I can do it today, right? And I'm sure, anybody can do it. It's not a big deal, isn't it? So this is about accommodating diversity with practical solutions. So short and the tall are both accommodated in their diversity for their diverse needs, and both can be served by the same solution. So let's think more about it, and we certainly should make it, many, many diverse angles as a part of this policy.
Nimita, may I?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, it's exactly, yeah, no, not exactly, 8.1 or 2. I would just like to check with both Professor Vijay and Professor Sharma about extending this session, because the amount of questions and points we have received is like 100 times more than what we have addressed already.
Yeah, that's fine for me. I'm happy to stay on.
Yeah.
There is a
Yeah,
whole range of areas to be covered. So I would just request that we try to touch many areas and not repeat ones which you're discussing. And we should always, of course, come back to them for deeper discussions later on.
Perfect. Thank you, Professor. Professor Sharma, I think you have already given your green signal.
So look, I'm a true professor. All my life, I've been teaching large classes. So I'm so happy when there's some people who are listening and are awake.
Or so
So
we
I'll be
think.
here as long as you're here.
Is Shagun lost connection? Shagun, are you there?
Yeah, looks like Shagun has faded off, but maybe
It's all right. We can go ahead. Yes, we could go ahead with the idea. Oh, that brings me. So we have talked a lot about startups. We have talked about how can we create an ecosystem for them, and and there are questions regarding the funding and the financing part of it also. So if you can just quickly bring up, some clues from there, like people are discussing about different instruments of funding, easy loans, private equity, investors, risk mitigations across this whole thing. Professor Vijay Raghavan, if you can just give us like a 1-minute quickie on this.
Sorry, I missed that. Is funding for what?
Funding for the startups. Because,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think you used all the right buzzwords for that. I'll just add one aspect to that. Societies which have successful startups going to scaling up in partnership with industry do have a very substantial government back-end support. In other words, there are very few places which have triggered off an innovation economy. And Sweden and Israel are recent ones. But if you look at parts of the US also, there is a back end of direct or indirect government support rather substantial. This support can come in multiple ways. Sometimes it is direct, but very often it comes by an enabling ecosystem. We have put in extraordinary measures over the last 5 years or so in having such an enabling ecosystem. That has resulted in a large number of startups of quality. And they now are facing a important new kind of challenge. It's a positive challenge of scaling and partnering with industry. Leave that aside for a moment. That requires certain kinds of capital and involvement for scaling, which you mentioned the right kind of terms that needs to go there. What we can enhance now, and that is something the policy could discuss, is our major laboratories, the DRDO, CSIR, the agricultural research laboratories, have got enormous talent, enormous amount of facilities, and also the kinds of resources to partner with industry and stakeholders such as farmers and go ahead at very high speed in innovative development. And that's something which needs to be more proactively enabled. Right now, the enabling structures are there, but there's a hesitation to wet one's toes. But that hesitation should go away by having more enabling structures, is my suggestion.
Thank you, Professor Raghavan. Is Shagun back?
Yes, thanks for taking the back. Nimita, sorry, the power went off, so I had to come back with a bang. I'm extremely sorry for that. So I don't know which section you went into, Nimita.
That's okay. I was just reading questions, and I was talking more about the financing mechanisms for startup. And I think one topic which is coming up very strongly is about, the new normal. People are talking about the new normal set by COVID-19, and wherein, with regard to startup, Professor Raghavan rightly pointed about how we can, adopt models, kind of contextualize them in the Indian context. I think there's a lot of debate on how we are trying to collaborate with different countries and what are the challenge in this new normal on different interventions. So this is a question which is coming up, which not just pertaining to the national interest, but also the global cause of addressing the pandemic. So I would like to listen to Professor Sharma on this to begin with.
Yeah, I think that people and the newspapers and everybody has talked so much about this. It's really beaten to death. But I can put in very quickly my 2 bits. And I'm sure all of us understand it. So have we been a little bit more successful during the time of COVID-19 than the business as usual? Yes, I think we certainly have been. To give you an example, let's say this world-class ventilator developed at IIT Kanpur, which is going for scale up now, right? It was developed in less than a month. There is nothing which tells us why it could not be developed 10 years ago, or 5 years ago, or 1 year ago, right? Everything that these people had with less constraints was all available 6 months ago. But all this while, we have been importing ventilators of that class, of that quality, right? So now you ask the question, what has happened? Okay, why couldn't I do it earlier? Why am I doing it now? Isn't it? So it's very simple. Look, this is the first time where I have seen a very clear and present shared purpose across the knowledge chain. Now, what that means is that the people at R&D end, and not just one person, because ventilator is not something that one chemist can make or a physicist can make. You need a team of people, mechanical engineer, electronics chap, everybody, right? So all of them roll up their sleeves, and despite the fact that they don't have students around, they don't have supply lines open, right? But they are working day, night, everything very excitedly, right? So it is not like armchair professor or something, scientist, who is only worried about his annual report or something, right? But these are people with purpose, with a sense of purpose, which is shared, right? Very important, and interdisciplinary team, and they are not competing with each other. See, remember the major, our model of working in science is competition, is not cooperation, right? So now we need competition to bring out individual brilliance and creativity, right? There's no doubt about it. There is no debate about it. But at the same time, if you want to make a ventilator, now you can't be an Einstein, right? And say, look, I mean, I'm going to work alone until I hit upon the theory of relativity or something, right? They're not going to work. So therefore, another model we should evolve, and this is a part of policy, which you may call model for cooperation, right? In which people are not looking at who would be the first author, who would be the corresponding author, who will get the credit. All these things should, in certain problems which are shared purpose, these questions should dissipate. Okay. And how do you make that possible? Right. Now, the second point is that, look, it's not that new resources came overnight for making that ventilator. Okay, so often we say, oh, no, I have constraints. Oh, I am not, my meter is not working, whatever, right? But you see, with cooperation and leveraging actually our resources and our knowledge, it's not that any new, infrastructure was created for this. It all happened spontaneously, isn't it? Third aspect is that the industry was on board from the beginning. So this is what I mean by end-to-end knowledge chain was complete. So now you think about a scientist, he's saying, look, this is the functionality I want. I know in terms of knowledge, but what kind of plastic part would be required actually to be put in this machine? Or what kind of electronic chip is going to go in there? We can leave it to that scientist, but it's going to take 1 eon before that solution is figured out. And it is unnecessary, because all that we have to leave to the people who know how to do it, isn't it? So therefore, involving people of different diverse backgrounds from the beginning. And so therefore, there is a direction and there is a execution which is rapid and which is optimal, right? So these are the basic ingredients for doing science, which is a problem-centric science. So there are two different kind of science, which is the tool-centric science and the problem-centric science. So while we have been doing rather well in tool-centric science, right, because this is our dominant model of doing science. So if I know, let's give you an example. When I was much younger in PhD or before, so I knew something called a singular perturbation. No, very few people would know about it now, catastrophe theory, right? Those are hot things, back then. And so I knew these tools. I was very proud of these tools. And I said, wherever I can apply them to whatever problem, I will search for the problem. So these are tools in search of a problem, right? Now, other thing is there are many problems that I search for tools, but not a single tool. It has to be a multiplicity of tools. And so therefore, this is what happened in the era, in the times of COVID-19. And I think many of these things are can be replicated either through what we call schemes and programs and sweeten the deal and stuff and inspiring people. And in fact, I think the fourth or fifth aspect that I'm talking about is a confidence. So I started with a sense of purpose, and I would conclude by saying, do we have that confidence, right? And so when people are thrown into, let us say, even a baby is thrown into a lake, she learns to swim. If it's sinking, then we'll rescue. But anyway, right? So this confidence comes that we can indeed actually solve the problem. And I have seen that there is a lack of confidence in many places. So a lot of our intelligent students, they are not going for startups. It's not because they don't have intelligence, they don't have ideas. It's because they lack confidence, right? Because there's been no model saying, look, I can actually succeed here. I mean, I've seen so many globally, so many people who are just not very intelligent, but they are so confident, right? That they really got it. So this is cultural aspect. Now, this cultural aspect is because, if my child gets even 95% in high school, I'm always scolding her. I'm saying, look, your neighbor has done 105%, right? Nothing is good enough. So no matter what you do, people have no confidence that they can pull something like this, right? And I think we can never underestimate the value of this element. I don't know how you translate that in terms of policy, but I would think about it. I'm sure we will have ways to weave this in policy, right? Nothing happens without purpose and confidence. No matter how much intelligence one has, no matter what resources we have, because we'll keep blaming lack of resources for everything. But lack of resources is not responsible for everything, right? Let me conclude by a little joke that I tell people often, in a convocation or somewhere. I say, look, if you complain too much, I say, go get a spouse, because not everything can be blamed on the government.
Thank you, Professor Sharma, on that note. Yeah, Professor Vijay Raghavan, if you can talk about the new normal and the STIP policy, it would be great to listen to you on this.
Well, I think we've heard a lot about that in some detail. All I think I can add is that, this has taught us how we should work collectively at multiple levels, as Ashutosh said, and that's very important. That requires a rethinking of our academic structures and our interactions with society, with industry, in a manner where it doesn't compromise the foundations of learning and knowledge and scholarship, yet has a connection with society.
If I may come in here, Nimita.
Yes, of course. Yes, please,
Yes,
please. I was about to call you.
No, because the channel from where I'm taking the questions are actually flooded and I'm blocked. So I have to put it out. I'm going to open a Pandora's box now. But before that, I would like to just commit on the timeline, because we don't want to keep our viewers also like just having an uncertain end to this conversation. So can we say like next 20 minutes and we conclude the session, which will be like a logical flow to go cover 2 more or 3 more aspects of the overall questions. Is that all right?
18 minutes, I would say.
Yeah,
18,
then
okay.
also hit our dinner time. So I think that is perfectly fine.
Perfect. 18 minutes, Professor. I'll keep that count. Thanks, Professor Sharma. Let me just quickly open that Pandora's box now. So there are a lot of questions on the resources. When I say resources, let me take the first aspect. To do broadly science, we need financial resources and other kind of resources. So let me first start with the human resource part, where there are questions on various viewpoints, which is how are we going to absorb our skilled PhD and postdoctoral researchers into the system, which looks like in terms of numbers, we have more, but in terms of keeping them in the system, giving them suitable positions or like research roles, we seem to have no strategy at all. And this is coming from not just 1 or 2, maybe more than 20, 30, maybe probably PhD and postdoc scholars and faculty members of various institutions. Would like to dwell upon that. Maybe I'll start with Professor Vijay on this, on human resource, critical human resource, PhDs and postdocs.
We are caught in a problem of extrapolating within what we think is what the future holds. And therefore, we say that we have a certain number of institutions, public or private, industry or academia, where researchers can be employed. And then we calibrate and ask whether we're getting sufficient people there, are they of quality or not. That's not an unimportant exercise, it's very important. But the real challenge is just to predict how things will change over a 5, 10, 15, 20-year period. And therefore not to be over-prepared or under-prepared for that. And that's not easy. But the fact of the matter is, and this is post-COVID, given what is going to happen to manufacturing, to industry, to basic science and technology, we will have to have a much, much stronger foundation in all of this as we grow. We have a huge swath of our young people who are not exposed to the best quality at fundamental foundational levels in these areas. So as that opens up, I think you're going to see a dramatic change in opportunity. Now that needs to be accompanied by training simultaneously, and that's not easy. But again, this pandemic has shown how one can have different kinds of training on scale. So multiple approaches have to be done. So it's going to be tough. It involves tying your shoelaces while you're running. But I think actually this is not a bad time to be a young person in science. Not that it's going to be easy.
Thanks, Professor Vijay. Connected to that, may I just extend that resources question to Professor Sharma, and then we'll move on to a fresh topic with Nimita. Professor Sharma,
So the human resources, indeed. I mean, see, often I have seen two groups of people arguing on extremes. And so one of them says, oh, we need 4 times the number of PhDs we have now. Usually, this group consists of professors who need to have more PhD students, clearly, and that's required. Other set of people who say, what is the meaning of PhD anyways? Why do we need any, right? So now this is a question of having the right perspective and balance. What is that balance and what is that perspective? See, I would start by saying that once I was addressing this gathering of people, which are called Ramanujan Fellows, Inspire Fellows, Ramalinga Swami Fellows. There must have been about 200 of them, right? So, and this is a question everybody had, look, where am I going to get a job and so on. And I asked them, how many of you are actually prepared for an industrial job? There were 3 hands that went up out of 200. Now, let me also cite, because they're saying this is a policy, we must have data, we must have evidence, we must have all of that, right? Now, if you look at the data globally, less than 10% PhDs are absorbed into academia. Right? It may vary between 5 to 15%. Okay. So it just basically means that while we have to strengthen those people who are cut out for academia, a PhD is not simply something, a conveyor belt in which one comes out after MSc and then goes into academia. Okay. That does not happen, will not happen, because simply mathematics is not there. Okay. Having said that, now second point is that so industry R&D, knowledge-based industries are the major employers of PhDs worldwide. How do we actually connect our PhDs in terms of their expectations and training? Right? The whole point is one part of PhD training is not only to train them to write papers, which is certainly, is something that has to be done, right? Which is the originality of thought, which is the creative impulses, which is to produce good quality papers and patents. But there are aspects of it which we as mentors, all of it is shared responsibility, that we are creating a holistic researcher, a scientist. Is not simply, oh, this is only I know for PhD, I cannot do anything else. Now, this is another problem, because we know that because of less risk-taking appetite beyond PhD, people continue to do the same thing that they learned in PhD and postdoc for another 2 decades. When the rest of the world has moved on, we are saying, I'm comfortable in my corner, right? So this is a weakness of our scientific ecosystem as a whole, that from father to daughter, the same tools are passed on, and they remain there forever. So it's going to be great amount of dynamism and considering as to how we generate more opportunities at every level. At PhD is not an exception. So it's same for BTech, for everybody else, right? So it has to do with the fact as to how we train them, what the expectations are. At the same time, for the industry to understand the value of knowledge and knowledge economy. And so some effort has to be greater effort in engaging with the employers, has to be part of our academic duties. I mean, it is my duty to my PhD students, because one-to-one relation. So you have to make sure that there's a quality in these PhD students, that they are not simply after having produced 5 papers, which may also go into my CV, right? Which is fine. I mean, I got nothing against it. My CV also has some papers in it, right? But beyond that, okay, there has to be something which carries forward, right? Which has its own stamina, which has its own insight. So all of that, I mean, has to be part of what we want to do and how we want to do it. It all boils down to the focus and quality and training of PhD students. It's not, look, and it's not only a job for the government. So, let me, put the question like this. I've already said it in a different word. You see, this is the government and everybody else are not separate. Okay, so it is, something has to be done by a professor, by me, something has to be done by my student, something has to be done by different sections of society in order to empower our PhDs, or for that matter, every scientific section of the society, all stakeholders of science and technology, right? It's not, so when, the question is, well, how do we create more opportunities? The more opportunities are not just simply created by somebody up there, it's created by society as a whole, okay? And being a participant in that process, and all of that should reflect in the policy. And so it includes industry, which is which is a major factor which is left out. Look, as the industry becomes more globally competitive, once it understands that, is the knowledge is driven by knowledge, and if there was no fresh knowledge coming in, it would cease to exist, right? As many global corporations and so on, right? That greater awareness in our industry is what basically would empower our PhDs. It is not simply another fellowship that's going to empower anybody, right? Fellowships are not lifelong. Okay, they're only a bridge to an end, isn't it? So quality, preparation, training, expectations, and all of that has to be in line with what the realities of this world are.
Hmm. Nimita, quickly, and then I move on to the final one, and then we'll end with. Nimita, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to flag, like, we already covered so many things, Shagun, and I believe there are so many more coming on the canvas right now. I am just moving across screens just to flip around YouTube,
I have a
LinkedIn.
strategy. I have a strategy probably. Let me go ahead then.
Yeah, sure, sure.
Yeah, one is a very pertaining point, which I believe, I don't know whether we'll get such an opportunity to have both of you again on the same call. So that without any hesitation, I'm going to put forth that point, and then we'll move towards final concluding remarks, and then probably conclude this launch session and town hall, and then we'll look forward to have another one. So that pertaining point is this: in terms of resources again. 2003 policy, 2013 policy, both talked about going up to 2% of GDP share for research funding in terms of finance, right? Um, Increasing the funding, not only from the government side, but from the industry side, broadly the national funding for research to be gone up to 2%. How are we going to strategize ourselves in a meaningful manner, at least in this policy? And this has come out in various forms in these comments, but I'm just summarizing it because that 2% from 2003 to 2013 was in the staggering level of 0.83. And then after that, till now, it is now currently 0.7. So now that we are climbing, this policy is going to be evidence driven. Do we have some kind of a strategy there for years to come? I'll start with Professor Vijay and then come to Professor Sharma. Professor Vijay.
So the quick answer to this is it's not just the amount of investment, it's about how and where does it come from. So we've had discussions over the last year and a half with industry bodies, with state governments, with the Finance Commission, with the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council on how this can be done. And we've charted out a detailed mechanism by which investment in different sectors by state governments, by the government of India, by industry, by other mechanisms can go and where this money will go. So that's a very valuable exercise, and I'll be happy to have a detailed discussion on that. So again, it's not increasing the amount, that's just a correlate between increasing the amount and quality of research. To understand the mechanism behind that correlate, we need to go through and understand all the exercises we went
through. Professor Sharma, your quick thoughts on that?
So it's a very wide topic, and how quick do you want it? But anyway, first let me correct one misconception which I've often hear people say. They say that it went from 0.87% of GDP to 0.7% of GDP. No, this is because the figures for GDP were revised. Okay, so GDP actually revised, GDP went up. So it's not that the money, the actual investment cannot go down because it's already happened, right? So what happened actually is that the figures for GDP going in the past were revised upwards. So when you look at the ratio, the same ratio, it becomes less. It does not mean that the actual money has become less. Of course, with increase in GDP that fortunately we have been having, also the overall quantum of money that has been growing in the same way as the GDP itself, right? Now, okay, and of course, Professor Vijay Raghavan has said things about, well, it's not about how much you spend, but how you spend it, where do you spend it, how do you leverage it? Look, there are two ways that if you have a bucket full of water, there are two ways you can use it. You can either throw it in a desert or you can throw it in a sea. Both are equally meaningless, right? So we must throw it where there would be a sprout coming out. Now, having said that, you see that thing about, one should also remember something else about when we look at this whole business about funding and so on, that we certainly need to increase it, there's no doubt. We certainly need more agencies contributing to it, including the private sector and the state government, where, states actually, they feel so alienated from science and technology. So while in health and education, they participate without realizing that health and education, everything is built on science and technology, and solutions to their problems are in science and technology. I think of late, they've been waking up a little bit, but essentially every time I, talk to some secretary, science technology in a state, I think he's saying, I'm just on a punishment duty, right? So I don't know. Look, so I'm just telling you frankly. So we need to bring in, like Professor Vijay Raghavan said, we need to bring in more stakeholders, industry, um, everybody, all sections of society that realize the value of science and technology, right? And then we are able to scale it up. But at the same time, to balance the perspective, we must also compute not just in terms of percentage of GDP, we must also compute it in terms of per capita scientist. See, another way to look at funding is not simply, oh, yeah, what, right? When you compare across, we must take care of two things. One is per capita investment, and the second is purchase power parity. I would conclude just by saying that most of my friends who are teaching in Berkeley or Princeton or anywhere, they require $100,000 per year per PhD student, to support. Now, if I'm getting 10 PhD students for free in my lab, thanks to generosity of this or that agency, right? That's actually worth $1 million somewhere else. So if I assume that my PhD student is equal to a PhD student somewhere else, I don't translate that in terms of money, right? But if I must translate that in terms of money, then I have to say that this my friend professor in Berkeley, he has a 3-year grant for $3 million It's only supporting what I'm getting free. Okay, no, this is not to overemphasize. Okay, so please don't take me wrong. It's not to overemphasize the aspect of funding, but I'm saying to bring some perspective into what this funding actually means, right? MIT, anybody, their overhead, they take 50%. Okay, so if you get $100,000, 50% just goes right away from the top, skimmed off, right? So no, we have some weaknesses. We also have some strengths. And I think we must remove the weaknesses, but build on the strengths and not minimize the strengths that we have. So we must look at what our strengths are, and we must acknowledge and build upon those strengths, right? You don't know how, under what weight, stress and tension, again, my same friends somewhere else are, because maybe NSF or whatever rate of acceptance is 15%. All day long, they're writing proposals. I mean, right? This is the norm in this world today. And there's no free lunch, absolutely no free lunch. And this guy, when he was complaining to me, he said he has to get his toilet paper also from his project because the university does not provide any, right? I mean, there's a way of saying it, but essentially, we have this flexibility, right? We have youthful energy and flexibility. If we don't fritter it away in just been totally focusing on the negatives, then this energy that we would have of the positivity will go into removing the negatives and then building some on top of that. This is my absolute advice to all my younger friends, right? So while it is not part of the policy, let me just say that from my personal experience and experience of everybody else, there are a lot of energy vampire aspects that go on in our scientific systems that we call negativity, or by whatever name you may call it, right? So I call it energy vampires. And we all know, you be around this guy 2 hours, you would not be able to work for 2 months because you're under such great depression that you say, oh my God, my life has ended, my science has ended, nothing, no hope for me, I better resign, whatever, I don't know, right? This is a cultural aspect. And this cultural aspect, you see, no matter what we'll do, if we fail to address this cultural aspect, I am afraid that no amount of money is going to remove it. It's not about resources only. It is about resources and something on top of that. And that top is equally important.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Sharma.
Shagun, can I may I have the privilege of asking the last question?
Please go ahead, Dr. Gupta.
Okay, I think since I think you are right that we will not get this opportunity to have these two great gentlemen again perhaps that early. So can I ask a question that is a very related question to what Shagun had asked? That how can we involve the state government into R&D activity in a more meaningful way? Probably the R&D at the state level have been mostly dominated by central government institutions. Do we have any plan of providing resources to state government for conducting R&D activity at their end? So may I start with Professor Vijay Raghavan?
Thank you very much, Akhilesh. It is indeed a challenge, but a challenge which can be overcome. State governments have increasing flexibility on how they can use their resources. The problem, therefore, comes, even so resources are always scarce. The problem comes when you try to allot some resources for R&D or science and technology. That fails on 2 counts. You can't allot enough, and you can't sustain after allocation. So many state governments start institutions or structures which they find not sustainable over a long term. The solution to this comes from partnerships in 2 ways. One, with industry, where needed and meaningful, and with the central government. And third, what we need to do is not have a state government science and technology section, but make sure that science and technology comes into place in every area which the state government works in: industry, agriculture, health, education, and so on. We had a meeting with all state government science and technology secretaries, as well as their chief secretaries and principal chief secretaries. And it is unusual to see, you would not expect it, but the state which was most forward-looking in terms of seeing the value of science and technology was Punjab. Punjab in every aspect, whether it is agriculture, they're now getting into water conservation, in terms of how they can deal with pesticides. This is over the last few years, their ministries are trying to get the best of science and technology into multiple aspects. In other words, it requires a perception within governments. Other governments also do that. But Gujarat, for example, has got extraordinary, you go to their science city near Ahmedabad, it's fantastic. You go to Karnataka, to the Karnataka University, Dharwad. That is an example of how integrated science is with local people. So states have actually done this really well. Other states have a little more disconnect. They view science as an intellectual enterprise and not disconnected with what they're doing. So this connection, I think, is more feasible now. Resources are needed. Today, we have allowed corporate social responsibility to be used to support research all over the country and incubators. So, small amounts of funds can go a long way, as Ashutosh said. And therefore, we must try to see if state governments can enthusiastically get resources, both from philanthropy, corporate social responsibility, their own resources, central government resources, to address pressing questions across the spectrum.
Thank you very much, Professor Vijay. Over to Shagun. Shagun, you like to...
Thank you, Dr. Gupta. Thank you, Professor Vijay Raghavan. Before I hand it over to Dr. Nimita, I just wanted to just conclude my part by saying this is one of the most honest public conversations that we had in recent times in STA areas and with the leaders of this field. And I'm really, really satisfied that this happened this way. And there are questions in various spectrums yet that is not even touched. And there are like hundreds of them, like for example, in STA governance, interconnectedness of various regions and languages, also in terms of other aspects from having makerspace and children engaged in science. So I'm sure that we can't just cover all of them in one session, but I would just like to highlight and say that is exactly where the Science Policy Forum activities will be running on from this week onwards, to have the larger public consultation on many of these questions, dedicated conversation like what Professor Vijay and Professor Sharma mentioned on each of those questions. We will aim to do and cover larger stakeholder voices in those. With that, I would like to thank from my side and hand it over to my co-moderator, Dr. Nimita, to go for a round of final remarks. Nimita, over to you.
Thank you, Shagun. I just want to say that it's a wonderful interactive session we had. Our audience, our viewers, our speakers, everyone is so energized with this whole idea. I would rather say being a part of this whole process is very overwhelming and very, I would say, a sense of elation it brings to us, that it kinds of gives us a lot of optimism that our leaders are looking forward to a more evidence-based, informed and inclusive policy making. And on this note, I would request the speakers to give their small, brief closing remarks on this event, because I think that we shouldn't come in between dinner and our all discussions. This would go on, and I think we need more webinars, more such meetings. So I would request Professor Vijay Raghavan to give his closing remarks. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much, Nimita. This has been very valuable, and as always, one learns a lot by such interactions. I would correct Shagun on 2 counts. He says these are unlikely events. I would say no, these events can be frequent, that's not a problem. And he also said that it's great to have great people here. I think he's wrong over there. There's no greatness in science. we should all be open to interactions and questions and criticism and feedback. So it's always wonderful to have that. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Vijayaraghavan. If I may ask Professor Sharma to give his concluding remarks.
Yeah, no, I agree with Professor Vijayaraghavan that we can have more frequently these sessions. My only request would be to start them after dinner. So we can go to midnight or past midnight. There is no other constraint about it. I'm totally happy, and I hope that we certainly do more of this. And I think it's been very fruitful. In fact, it's fruitful not just people who have been listening, but also people who have been speaking. Because as you speak, some things become clearer in your mind as well. And I hope that with this session, all the inputs that we would get, right, and they would greatly enrich our policy making aspects. So what can I say? Bon appetit.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Professor Sharma. Thank you so much. If I may request Dr. Gupta to kindly say a few words.
Okay.
Over to you, Dr. Gupta.
Thank you, Nimita. I would say that, this is the greatness of people that they don't like to be called great. So we are also very grateful to them that being with us. And I would say it's truly a privilege for me to lead a young team. I feel 10 years younger when I see people like Shagun, Nimita, and many others are part of the team that we are there, the secretariat in DST. And I can assure on behalf of the team that we will try our best to come up with a wonderful and something very, very forward-looking policy with the guidance of Professor Vijayaraghavan and Professor Ashutosh Sharma. We are, in fact, every day is a new challenge for us, and we are ready to meet those challenges. So thank you very much for both of you to be here, and I really thank on behalf of my entire team, and thank Shagun and Nimita, and also Aditya and Spurti for being here with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta. With this, we come to the end of the town hall session. However, now the show is still about to conclude. For that, I would request Spurti to come and convey her vote of thanks. Over to you, Spurti.
Thanks, Namita. This was a long deliberation that was, I think, very participatory from all of us and the audience who joined us. I take this opportunity to thank our speakers, Dr. Akhilesh Gupta, Professor Ashutosh Sharma, and Professor Vijayaraghavan for taking your time, staying away from dinner, and answering the questions that were in audience's mind. This discussion wouldn't have been fruitful without the enthusiastic participation of our audience, who took their time not only to attend this, but also ask some of the great questions on STIP 2020. On behalf of everyone, I also would like to thank the larger team that has enabled this event, specifically the Secretariat of the STIP 2020, Gubi Labs, and Rockstar Social. While the curtain draws on our first event today, please note that we will have series of such interactions planned as part of the public consultations. And it was great to hear that Professor Vijayaraghavan, Professor Sharma, as well as Dr. Gupta, were happy to have more such sessions. So it's all a welcome thing for us. Please check back on our social media handles and our website for further details on upcoming events. With that, thank you again who joined us today, and everybody have a good night.
May I just quickly